The desert was howling that night. Wind tore through the canyons like a wounded beast, carrying with it the sound of distant thunder and the sharp taste of dust. The horizon was swallowed by red sand and lightning. Every few seconds, a flash split the sky wide open, revealing the ghostly outline of Coyote Bend, a lonely speck of ranch land on the edge of nowhere. Through the storm stumbled a woman. Her dark hair, heavy with grit and rain, clung to her face. Her clothes were torn from travel, her moccasins caked with mud. In her arms, wrapped tight in a faded blanket, was a small boy, limp, feverish, his lips pale as ash. She whispered to him in Apache, her voice trembling, more prayer than words. "Taza," she told herself. "Keep walking." Her name was Taza, widow, mother, and fugitive. Each step was a fight against the wind. The child's breathing was faint, the storm unforgiving. The desert had already claimed men far stronger than her, but she refused to let it take her boy. A crack of thunder rolled across the plain. Ahead, a faint light, the glow of a lantern swinging by a fence post. She followed it, stumbling to her knees, then dragging herself forward until her hand struck the cold, iron gate of a ranch. Inside, Rhett Callahan stood beneath the eaves of his barn, rifle in hand, watching the storm chew up the land he'd worked half his life to tame. His broad frame was still as stone, his face hidden beneath a sweat-stained hat. The man hadn't had company in years. Not since the fire, not since he buried the woman he'd loved and the child he couldn't save. The thunder covered the sound of footsteps until she was nearly at his porch. He turned, rifle raised. "Don't come any closer," he shouted above the wind. The woman froze, clutching the child tighter. The lantern light trembled between them. Two souls, stranded in a storm neither had asked for. Her lips cracked as she tried to speak. When she did, her words barely rose above the wind. "Please, let me stay the night." Her voice broke. It wasn't a demand, it was a plea, the kind that reached deeper than pity. She took a step forward, revealing the small boy in her arms. His head lolled against her shoulder. His skin burned with fever. Rhett hesitated, finger on the trigger. He'd seen Apache raiders before, fast, ruthless, and proud. But this woman was no threat. Not in this storm. Not with the dying child. "Where'd you come from?" he barked. No answer. Only the sound of the wind pushing against her back. She swayed on her feet. The child whimpered. For a moment, Rhett thought of another night. Years ago, when a different storm had taken everything from him. The smell of smoke. The cry of his wife's voice calling his name from the flames. The weight of his own helplessness. He lowered his rifle. "Get inside," he muttered, almost to himself. She didn't move until he took a step forward and held out his hand. Then she stumbled past him into the dim glow of the cabin. He shut the door behind them, barring out the world. The room was small, a hearth, a table, 2 chairs, and the ghosts of better years. Rhett threw a log into the fire, the flames flaring to life. "Lay him by the fire," he said gruffly. She obeyed, kneeling beside the hearth, whispering to her son in a language he didn't know. Her hand shook as she pulled the blanket tighter around the boy's chest. Rhett crouched nearby, watching. What happened to him? She hesitated. Her eyes darted to his rifle leaning against the wall. "Fever," she said at last. "From the river. 3 days, no food. No water." Rhett nodded slowly. He poured her a cup of water and handed it over. She drank as if she hadn't touched liquid in days. Silence hung heavy between them, the kind that said too much without a word. Outside, thunder rolled closer. The cabin walls rattled. Taza looked up. For the first time, their eyes met fully, hers deep and dark like wet stone, his cold and distant as the horizon. Somewhere between fear and trust, something unspoken passed between them. Then lightning flashed through the window. For a split second, the room lit up and Rhett saw it. Half hidden beneath her shawl, tied against her hip, was a blood-stained knife. The kind only used for fighting, not hunting. Rhett's breath caught. The storm roared outside, but inside, the world fell still. His hand twitched toward the rifle near the wall. She noticed. Her gaze hardened. The fire crackled between them, throwing shadows across her face. He spoke low. "That knife, whose it belonged to?" She didn't answer. The next lightning flash showed something else, a smear of dried blood on her sleeve that wasn't her own. Rhett felt his gut tighten. The woman before him wasn't just running from hunger or a storm. She was running from something darker, something close, something deadly. The wind screamed through the cracks in the door, as if warning them both. And in the dim firelight, the Apache widow whispered under her breath, too soft for him to understand, clutching her son close as if the night itself might reach for him. The storm had passed, but the world it left behind was colorless, a wasteland of dust and silence. The morning light crept over the hills of Coyote Bend, laying bare what the night had broken. Fence posts lay splintered. The troughs were full of red mud. Smoke from a half-burned wagon still curled into the pale sky. The desert had a way of humbling everything, men, beasts, even time. Inside the ranch house, Rhett Callahan sat at his wooden table, polishing his rifle in silence. The smell of coffee and wood smoke filled the air. Across the room, Taza moved quietly, every motion careful, measured, like someone who didn't trust the walls around her yet. Her dark hair hung loose now, streaked with the pale dust of the desert. Her son slept on a pile of quilts near the hearth, his breathing steady for the first time in days. Taza stirred a small pot over the fire, beans, wild onions, and a bit of salt pork she'd found in his pantry. Borrowed food, borrowed warmth. She didn't speak, but her eyes followed Rhett in silence. Every time he stood or reached for something, her hand drifted near the knife at her hip, still streaked faintly with old blood. Rhett noticed, though he pretended not to. He'd seen that same tension in wild horses before. They never turned their back on what might hurt them. He respected that. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, low as gravel. "You can rest a spell. You don't owe me chores." She kept stirring. "I pay what I take." "We're in a skin for payment," he muttered. "You took me in," she said softly. "That's dead enough." The words hung in the air like smoke. Rhett looked at her, really looked. The faint bruises on her wrists, the cracked skin of her hands, the way her shoulders stayed squared, even when her eyes betrayed exhaustion. This was a woman used to standing alone in a world that wanted her gone. He poured himself a cup of coffee and watched her pour a little water over the beans, careful not to waste a drop. "You got a name?" he asked. She hesitated. Then quietly, "Taza." "Rhett," he said. She nodded once. "I know. Your name's on the gate." A knock sounded at the door, sharp, impatient. Rhett stood, rifle in hand, motioning for her to stay quiet. He opened the door to find Milo, his ranch hand brushing sand from his hat. Milo was younger, red-haired, full of loud confidence and small-town spite. "Health of a storm last night," Milo said, stepping in without asking. "Lost half the north fence. You seen the creek? It's flooded bad." Then his eyes fell on Taza. The air changed. Milo's mouth twisted. "What in blazes? You letting her in here?" Rhett's voice hardened. "She had a child with her. He died out there." Milo's tone turned mean. "You can't trust her kind, Rhett. Apache'll slit your throat soon as thank you. My uncle fought him." "That's enough," Rhett snapped, louder than he meant to. The boy by the fire stirred, and Taza's hand went to his shoulder protectively. Her eyes flashed like flint. Milo took a slow step back, scoffing. "You forget what happened to your wife. You bringing their kind into your house after that." Rhett's jaw tightened. His fingers flexed around the rifle. "You fix the fence," he said coldly, "and keep your mouth shut." Milo hesitated, then spat into the dirt outside. "You're making a mistake, boss." He slammed the door behind him. The room fell silent again. Taza didn't thank him. She just ladled a small bowl of beans and set it near his hand, a quiet gesture of respect, or maybe a peace offering. He took it. For a while, the only sounds were the crackle of fire and the faint snore of the sleeping boy. Then Rhett spoke, softer this time. He was wrong, what he said. She looked up. "About what?" "My wife," he said after a pause. "She once saved an Apache child. Years back. Found him shot near the creek. Took him in, fed him, stitched him up. Sheriff wanted to hang her for it. Said she was helping the enemy." He looked into the fire. She said people ain't enemies till someone teaches 'em to be. Taz's face softened, just slightly. Your wife sounds like someone my people would have honored. Rhett's throat tightened. She was. For a long moment, neither spoke. The world outside the cabin was still, the kind of stillness that comes before something breaks. Finally, Taza broke the silence. Her voice was low, tired, and filled with the weight of memories. My husband refused to sell our land, she said, to the white men who dig into the mountains. He said the ground still breathed, said it was sacred. She looked down at her hands. They called him a thief. He wanted to speak peace, and they shot him in the back. Rhett's hand froze around his cup. And you've been running since? She nodded once. For men who say I killed one of them. But I only buried my husband. Rhett looked at her, at the quiet fire in her eyes, the pain she refused to show, and for the first time in years, something stirred inside him. Not trust yet, but something close to it. The morning faded into dusk. Rhett walked out to check the fences. The land stretched empty in every direction, wind whispering through the mesquite, crows circling above. For a moment, it felt peaceful again. Then his eyes narrowed. Far off in the red glow of sunset, 3 black specks moved along the ridge, riders. Slow, deliberate, headed straight for the ranch. He lowered his spyglass, jaw tightening. Inside the cabin, Taza looked up from tending her child, sensing the shift in the air, the way only someone being hunted could feel. Rhett stood still, watching the horizon darken around the distant shapes. His hand went to his gun belt. Storm's coming again, he muttered. But this one wasn't made of wind. The day was still when they came. Too still. The wind had gone quiet, the sky heavy with heat that shimmered off the sand. Even the crows had vanished from the fence posts, as if they knew trouble was riding in from the ridge. Rhett Callahan saw the riders first. 3 of them, dark shapes cutting across the horizon. The lead man rode a black gelding that kicked up dust like smoke. Behind him trailed 2 others, rifles slung across their backs, eyes scanning the land as if every shadow might hide a secret. Rhett wiped his hands on his jeans, then called into the house, "Stay inside." Taza froze by the window, her son still sleeping near the hearth. Her pulse quickened. She didn't ask who it was. She didn't need to. The look on Rhett's face told her everything. He stepped off the porch, rifle in hand, as the riders drew close. The lead man was tall, lean, with sun-cracked skin and eyes the color of cold iron. Clay Murdoch. Rhett knew the name. Everyone in the territory did. Foreman of the Red Mesa mine, a man who owned more guns than conscience. Murdoch tipped his hat as he dismounted, boots crunching against dry earth. "Afternoon, Callahan," he drawled, his voice smooth as whiskey and twice as dangerous. "Heard you had a little excitement last night." Rhett leaned his rifle against the porch rail. "Storm blew a few fences down. That's all." "Storm, huh?" Murdoch glanced at the house, eyes narrow. "Funny thing, we're tracking someone who passed this way right before it hit. Apache woman, traveling with a half-breed boy. You seen anyone like that?" Rhett's jaw tightened, but his face didn't move. "No," he said flatly. "Ain't seen a soul." One of Murdoch's men, a wiry redhead with a scar over his lip, spat into the dust. "Tracks lead straight through your pasture. Plenty of strays come through here," Rhett said. "You'll forgive me for not keeping count." Murdoch smiled, slow, wolfish. "She ain't just some wanderer, Rhett. She's wanted for murder. Killed a white prospector near Red Mesa. Took a handful of gold he'd just dug up. Word is she's hiding out with the loot. Company wants her found." He reached into his vest pocket and flicked a small folded paper toward Rhett. "A bounty notice. $100, dead or alive." Rhett's eyes lingered on the bold letters. $100 was more than most men in Coyote Bend made in a season. Enough to fix every fence, replace every lost cow, maybe even start over. But he didn't look tempted, just angry. "Seems you got yourself a story," Rhett said coldly. "But stories blow around easy out here." Murdoch's grin faded. "You sure about that answer?" Rhett stepped forward. The sun caught his eyes, hard and unblinking. "You accusing me of something?" The silence stretched. Then Murdoch chuckled, low and mean. "Wouldn't dream of it, Callahan. I just know you got a big heart. Too big, maybe. Sometimes it gets men killed. He tipped his hat again, turned to his men. Mount up. We'll ride north. As the riders swung into their saddles, Murdoch called back over his shoulder. You hear anything, you come find me. Red Mesa Camp. You bring her in alive or dead. You'll never have to fix another fence again. They rode off slow, like wolves circling a dying fire, until the dust swallowed them whole. When Rhett turned back to the house, Taza was standing in the doorway. She hadn't moved. Her face was pale beneath the sun-darkened skin, her eyes wide but steady. They'll come back, she said quietly. Rhett shut the door behind him. Not if they believe me. They won't, she whispered. He's not the kind to stop. Not until I'm dead. Rhett frowned. That man, Murdoch. What's he want with you? Taza hesitated. Her hand rested over her heart, trembling slightly. Then she said it. The truth she'd carried through every mile of dust and fear. My husband worked for him, at the mine. Her voice shook. He found gold, a new vein, rich and deep. Said it would feed the whole tribe. He told Murdoch he wouldn't sell our land, not for any price. That it belonged to the earth, not to men. Her eyes filled with a dull fire. Murdoch came that night with 4 men. They dragged my husband from our tent, beat him until he stopped breathing. I tried to stop them. One of them, she swallowed hard. One of them cut me. Right here. She pulled her shawl aside, revealing the faint scar along her arm. The same mark Rhett had seen when lightning flashed the night before. He thought I was dead, but I wasn't. I buried my husband before the sun rose. Took my boy and ran. That knife you saw, she looked up at him. It's his blood on it. And Murdoch's man's. Rhett said nothing for a long time. He just stood there, eyes on the floorboards, jaw clenched. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and tight. That mine's been poisoned since it opened, he said. Every man in Coyote Bend knows it. But nobody's ever had the guts to stand up to Murdoch. She looked at him, desperate, defiant, waiting for him to send her away. Instead, Rhett stepped to the window and looked toward the distant ridge, where the dust from their horses still hung like smoke in the sunlight. If I keep you here, he said quietly, I'm putting a target on my land. On my name. Taza bowed her head. Then I'll go. He turned to her, eyes steady. No. She looked up sharply. Why? He loaded a fresh round into his rifle with a soft click. Because a man's got to live with what he lets happen, he said. And I've let enough wrong go unpunished in my time. He looked out at the red sky again, voice barely above a whisper. They won't touch you. Not here. Outside, the wind stirred again, soft at first, then rising, carrying the scent of iron and storm. Somewhere on the horizon, the sun sank behind Red Mesa, turning the sky the color of blood. And for the first time in years, Rhett Callahan felt alive again, standing between a hunted woman and the devil who'd made her one. Night fell hard and clear over Coyote Bend. The storm was gone, but its ghost lingered, in the smell of wet dust, in the broken fences, in the way every coyote's howl sounded like a warning. The moon hung low, pale and sharp as a blade. Rhett Callahan sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees, the glow of a lantern flickering beside him. Inside, Taza hummed softly, cooling her boy's fever with a damp cloth. Her voice, low, mournful, drifted through the open window, something between a prayer and a memory. Rhett didn't understand the words, but the sound settled something deep in him. It reminded him of his wife, of her gentleness, her courage, of the time she'd carried an Apache child across the river to save him from drowning. Back when Rhett still believed the world could be good. He took a long breath, then heard boots scuff behind him. Milo, he muttered without turning. Couldn't sleep? The younger man leaned against the post, arms folded. No, sir. Hard asleep with killers riding around. Rhett said nothing. Milo's gaze slid toward the window where Taza's shadow moved against the light. You sure about this, boss? Keeping her here? That bounty's real. $100. You'd fix this whole place, maybe buy more cattle. Rhett looked up, his voice flat. We're not bounty hunters. Milo hesitated, then pushed on. Yeah, but she's dangerous. You don't know what she's capable of. She's a mother, Rhett said. That's what she's capable of. Milo kicked at the porch rail. You think Murdoch's just gonna walk away? He's got men watching. I heard they've been riding the ridge all day, waiting for something. Rhett stood, slow and deliberate. Then, they'll keep waiting. He started toward the barn, but Milo's next words stopped him cold. You're risking your life for her, Rhett. For an Apache. The air between them turned to ice. Rhett turned his head slightly, eyes hard as flint. You watch your mouth. Milo shifted, embarrassed but angry. You don't even know her story. Maybe she's telling the truth, maybe she ain't. But men like Murdoch don't chase ghosts. If he's after her, there's a reason. Rhett's hand tightened on his rifle. I got my reason, he said. That's enough. Milo held his stare a moment longer, then spat in the dust and stormed off into the night. Hours later, the ranch slept. The desert was silver under the moonlight, every cactus and fence post casting a long shadow. Inside the small cabin, Taza finally drifted to sleep beside her son, his tiny chest rising and falling in rhythm with her soft breathing. Rhett checked the barn one last time, then walked to the corral to water the horses. His shoulders ached, his thoughts heavier than the night sky. That's when he saw it, a faint glow on the ridge. A campfire, too small for travelers, too deliberate. His gut tightened. He grabbed his rifle and headed back toward the house, boots silent in the dirt. But before he reached the porch, he heard something else, low voices near the side gate. Rhett froze, crouched behind the trough. Milo's voice. She's inside. Told you, Murdoch. She's still here. But you gotta promise me the reward. Half up front. Rhett's stomach turned to stone. Through the shadows, he saw them. Murdoch and two of his men, crouched by the fence, rifles gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Milo stood with them, face pale and nervous. You did good, boy, Murdoch whispered. Soon as she steps outside, we'll take her and the kid both. Callahan don't need to die, unless he gets in the way. Rhett didn't wait to hear more. He moved fast and silent across the yard, slipping behind the barn. His breath came slow, his heartbeat steady, the old soldier in him waking again after years of quiet. He reached the porch, kicked the door open. Taza, he hissed. She jerked awake instantly, hand going for the knife under her blanket. They're here, he said. Grab the boy. We're moving. Without a word, she bundled her son in her shawl and followed him out the back, slipping through the barn and into the open desert. Behind them, Murdoch's men crept toward the cabin, rifles raised. A whisper of movement. A latch creaked. Then Murdoch's voice. Now. They kicked the door in, but the house was empty. Lanterns still burning. Bed still warm. Damn it, Murdoch snarled. Where? A gunshot cracked from the shadows, and one of his men dropped like a stone. Rhett stood 20 yards away, half hidden by the corral, smoke curling from the barrel of his rifle. Murdoch, he called. You picked the wrong ranch. Bullets tore through the night. Wood splintered, dirt flew. Rhett ducked behind a trough and fired again, dropping the second rider. Murdoch returned fire, cursing. By the time he reached the barn, Rhett was gone, vanished into the desert night. They rode until dawn. The horizon glowed pink and gold, and the boy's fever finally broke, his tiny hand gripping his mother's sleeve. Rhett stopped on a rocky ledge overlooking the valley. The ranch lay far behind, smoke rising from where Murdoch's men had burned what they couldn't take. Taza turned to Rhett, her eyes dark with grief. You're home. He shook his head. It was just wood and nails. He looked out at the sun, lifting over the land, voice steady and quiet. But now he's made it war. The sun rose like fire over the red mesa cliffs, turning the desert to gold and blood. Heat shimmered off the stone, and every shadow seemed to whisper of violence waiting to happen. Rhett Callahan stood beside his horse, tightening the saddle straps with hands that no longer trembled. The old soldier in him was awake again, steady, grim, and ready. Taza watched him in silence, her son asleep under a patch of shade. The wind tangled her dark hair, and the faint scars along her wrist caught the morning light. She carried no tears now, only purpose. For the first time since the storm, her voice was calm. You could leave, she said. They'll come for me, not you. Rhett glanced at her, a hard, quiet look that said more than words ever could. Too late for that, he said. They burned my home. They aimed their guns at my mercy. Now I am back. Taze studied him, her eyes full of something fierce and unspoken. They fear one thing, she said softly. The truth. The gold my husband found. It was under their land. They killed him to take it. If people knew. Rhett's jaw tightened. Then we make them know. He loaded his rifle, the metallic click echoing in the still morning air. Let's end this. By mid-morning, they reached the ridge overlooking Red Mesa Mine, a pit carved into the desert floor, ringed by wooden scaffolds and tents. Smoke rose from the smelter stacks. Men moved like ants below, hauling or shoveling dust, unaware of what was coming. Rhett knelt beside Taza, pointing to a small shack near the center of the camp. That's Murdoch's office. He keeps the payroll, the deeds, everything that ties him to this land. Taza's eyes narrowed. And his sins. They waited until the sun was high, until the camp was lazy and unguarded. Then they moved, silent as shadows. Rhett slipped down the slope first, staying low behind boulders and half-broken wagons. Taza followed, her steps light and sure, knife hidden under her shawl. The air shimmered with heat. Every heartbeat felt louder than thunder. They reached the edge of the camp just as a bell rang for the noon break. Miners dropped their tools and shuffled toward the mess tent. Rhett nodded once. Now, they moved fast. Rhett kicked in shack door, rifle ready. Murdoch spun around from his desk, surprise flashing across his face before it hardened into rage. Well, I'll be damned, he sneered. The rancher and his savage. Thought you'd be halfway to Texas by now. Not till we're done, Rhett said. Murdoch laughed, a dry, hollow sound. You think you can walk in here and scare me? Callahan? I own this land. I own this town. You're just a ghost of what used to matter. Taza stepped forward, her voice low and deadly calm. You own my husband's life, too. Until you took it. Murdoch's hand twitched toward his holster, but she was faster. Her knife flashed once, slicing across his hand. He shouted, stumbling back as Rhett fired a warning shot into the wall beside him. Where's the deed? Rhett barked. Murdoch gritted his teeth, clutching his bleeding hand. Burned it. You'll find nothing. Taza's gaze shifted, past him, to a locked chest behind the desk. She moved before he could react, driving her blade into the lock. It snapped open with a metallic crack. Inside lay papers, maps, ledgers, and the mining rights signed in Murdoch's name. Proof. Everything they needed. She grabbed the documents and turned to Rhett. We have to go. But Murdoch wasn't done. He lunged, grabbing the pistol from his desk drawer and firing. The bullet tore past Taza's arm, grazing her skin. Rhett spun and fired back, once clean and final. Murdoch dropped, the gun falling from his hand. The noise echoed across the mesa, drawing shouts from the yard. Miners and hired guns began to swarm toward the shack. Go! Rhett yelled, grabbing Taza's hand. They sprinted through the camp as bullets hissed through the air. Horses neighed, men shouted. Dust filled their lungs. They reached the outer fence, leapt it, and tore through the scrub toward the open desert. Behind them, smoke began to rise. One of Murdoch's men had knocked over a lantern, and the shack was burning, flames swallowing the proof they couldn't carry. Still, Taza clutched the most important papers to her chest. The map. The signatures. The gold rights her husband died for. They rode until the sun sank behind the mountains. When they finally stopped, both were silent, breathing hard, covered in dust and sweat. Rhett looked at her, his voice rough but steady. You did it. You got your truth. She nodded, staring at the horizon where the sky bled red and purple. My husband's spirit can rest now. Rhett's eyes softened. And Murdoch. Taza turned, her expression unreadable. His fire will spread. Men like him always leave ashes behind. Rhett glanced toward the burning mesa in the distance, flames rising like a warning to the whole territory. Then let it burn, he said quietly. Let every man who took from the weak remember what it costs. The desert wind rose again, carrying the smell of smoke and justice across the endless sand. The desert was quiet again. After weeks of gunfire, storms, and blood, the silence felt almost holy. Rhett Callahan rode slow through the valley, the sun just beginning to rise behind him. The first light spilled across the land, soft, golden, forgiving. Behind him, the burned ruins of Red Mesa Mine lay still, a black scar against the horizon. The wind carried only smoke and the sound of distant coyotes. Beside him rode Taza, her son bundled in a blanket, sleeping against her shoulder. His fever had broken days ago, and his breathing was strong now. For the first time since that terrible night, there was peace in her eyes, fragile but real. They reached what was left of Rhett's ranch by noon. The barn was half collapsed, the fences torn, the main house nothing but char and timber. Rhett dismounted, his boots sinking into the ash. Taza stood behind him, silent. "You can rebuild," she said softly. Rhett looked around, then shook his head. "Maybe, but I think the land's had enough of me." He knelt, running his hand through the dirt. It was still warm beneath the surface, alive, despite all it had endured. He turned to her. "There's a town north of here, Silver Creek. Sheriff there ain't on Murdoch's payroll. Those papers you took will be enough to clear your name and get your husband's land back in your son's name." She hesitated, eyes dark with gratitude and sorrow. "And you?" Rhett gave a faint smile. "I've got no one left to run from, or to... Maybe I'll start again someplace quieter. Maybe build something smaller. A life that doesn't need a gun." She stepped closer, her hand brushing the sleeve of his coat. "You risked everything for me. For a woman your world told you to fear." Rhett's gaze met hers. "My world was wrong." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind carried the scent of sage and ash. The boy stirred and murmured in his sleep. Taza smiled faintly. "His name is Dason," she whispered. "It means chief. My husband hoped he'd grow to lead others, not with fear, but with honor." Rhett nodded slowly. "Then he will." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of metal, a badge, tarnished and bent. The last remnant of his time as a deputy, years before he'd turned away from the law. He handed it to her. "When he's old enough, give him this. Tell him it belonged to a man who finally remembered what right feels like." Taza looked at the badge as if it were made of gold. Her hand trembled slightly. "You'll be remembered, Rhett Callahan." He smiled faintly. "I don't need to be remembered. Just want to know you'll be safe." That night, they camped near the bend in the river, the place where the storm had first thrown them together. The stars blazed over the desert, bright and endless. Taza hummed softly by the fire while Rhett fixed a pot of coffee. "You ever think about going home?" Rhett asked quietly. She poked at the embers with a stick. "Home is where someone lets you stay," she said. He looked up at her, and she smiled. The first true smile he'd seen from her. It reached her eyes, chasing away the years of fear. "I reckon you're right," he said. The boy stirred, opening his eyes to the firelight. Rhett smiled and handed him a tin cup of water. "You're safe now, little man," he said softly. Taza looked between them, the rancher with the scarred hands and the child she thought she'd lose, and something inside her finally broke free. The weight, the fear, the running, all gone, carried off by the wind. At dawn, she and her son rode north towards Silver Creek, the papers safe in her saddlebag. Rhett stood by the river, watching them fade into the light. The rising sun hid his face, and for the first time in years, he felt clean. He took a breath, deep and full, then turned toward the ashes of his ranch. With each step, the past fell further behind. He would rebuild, not the house, but himself. And somewhere beyond the hills, the woman he'd saved would start again too. The wind carried her voice one last time, faint but sure. "Thank you, Rhett Callahan." He tipped his hat toward the horizon. "Safe travels, Taza." The desert swallowed the sound, and the sun climbed higher. A new day born from dust, blood, and mercy.